Um, Thank you, Denis and Nicholas. So question to Ronald Gregg. You have just discovered the film. How would you, we'll talk about the fact that most of the videos belong to the English-speaking world. We'll come to that afterwards. But I'd like to hear you about how you situate the film in, let's say, a history of coming out scenes in, let's say, American film. Can you draw a line or a historic line of how have scenes of coming out have been represented, narrated, and staged?
Sure. First off, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. You know, I would divide it between a kind of Hollywood polished presentation of coming out versus Denis' sort of beautiful moving film here in a more documentary space. You know, one of the first images when we teach queer cinema that is considered a kind of coming out scene is a film called The Children's Hour in the early 1960s with Shirley MacLaine and Hepburn. I'm forgetting the first, Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn. But in this film, near the end of the film, Shirley MacLaine plays a character, Martha, that comes out to her friend and says that she's loved her. And so it's the first time in cinema where a character kind of comes into an awareness of her psychology, her sort of interior love for another woman that has been read as abnormal all through the film. And she kind of ignores it until the very end of the film. But it's also a painful moment because she says, I feel dirty, I'm abnormal, you should reject me. And at the end of the film, she does commit suicide. So there's a sense that while you have a film in a Hollywood, you know, polished industry film written by two straight men, one directing and one doing the screenplay, that it's still, you know, within a space to where it would still be very hard to kind of come out. And it's seen as something that's pathetic on some level. And so it wouldn't be, and there's a number of films in the 1960s. The 1960s is actually amazing for the number of gay characters that start popping up in film. But on some level, they're all either damaged, you know, isolated, feeling very much like the Shirley MacLaine character in The Children's Hour. But with Stonewall in 1969, you get a kind of marker of the beginning of a trope of coming out, and coming out that has a political connotation, or a trope that starts appearing not only in a kind of political campaign. And in fact, after Stonewall, one of the slogans was come out wherever you are. That was part of a political campaign by gay and lesbian activists. One of the first periodicals in the early 70s was called Come Out. And so it was immediately attached as a strategy to try to bring people out of the closet, confessing to family, confessing to films, but it was seen as politically necessary to bring more people out of the closet to kind of build a political power. And the film that I immediately associate Denis' film with is a 1977 film called Word Is Out. And Word Is Out is very similar to what Denis has done here, that you had a group of gay and lesbian filmmakers, unlike The Children's Hour, where it's made by the industry that's seen as kind of straight, white, patriarchal. But you had a number of gay and lesbian filmmakers come together and they interviewed over 100 people. And then they made a documentary, boiled that down to a little over 20 talking heads. And it's a moment where the individuals in this film basically are coming out. And they're talking about their difficult childhoods, their coming out period, and then where they are in the 1970s as far as that trajectory. But on some level, it's a film that kind of marks this trope that becomes really important for almost all queer people. Both the ritual that is unique to LGBT people. When you think of other groups, other demographics, they don't have this kind of coming out moment, both to themselves, to their friends, and to their family. And so films, independent films, even Hollywood films, and through a new queer cinema in the 90s, picks up on this trope. And I would say it appears in documentaries and fictional films. But what I love about what Denis done, and he's right, it marks a real shift because the films that are basically before 2006, with the founding, the starting of YouTube, you didn't have this space where people could go online and see other people coming out, other people talking about their gay lives, particularly if they were isolated in small communities outside of the city. And like Denis, I have to admit, in 2006, I started seeing this phenomenon, which was incredible, of kids blogging, on their own YouTube channels and talking about this. I find that this is a treasure that you've archived, these incredible videos. But it illustrates, I think, what's really important. The last thing I'll say, so I don't talk too much, is that it illustrates a moment of an incredible shift. Like Denis, I grew up in a world where I was completely isolated. I couldn't come out, or I didn't even know who to talk to. There was no one to even, I had to live through these Hollywood films that I'm talking about, like The Children's Hour, going to a small town cinema, and finding myself, and maybe even interpreting films through a kind of gay lens, trying to find myself within those films, even though they weren't directly addressing me, to me. And now you have a generation that has all of this material in social media to kind of find themselves, to basically see other people coming out, and on some level, finding a diaspora, a community, and reaching out and talking to them first before they start talking to their friends. I mean, sort of living virtually in a kind of coming out period, and then maybe moving into a more personal, familial, social, larger space of actually in-person coming out. They can sort of test it. And I'm in a generation that had no place to test that. So again, I think that's a kind of rough thread trajectory, but I think it really illustrates the importance of this film and what Denis said, its importance.
So I just want to say that just for a moment, first of all, to make sure that you're hearing Ron, I saw Nora nodding, so I'm assuming that the sound is good. I do think that there are people in the audience who would also like to ask some questions, and they've been waiting patiently. So maybe, Nora, do you want to maybe ask one more question of Denis, or let Denis answer some of Ron's remarks, and then we can take questions from the audience? How does that sound?
Yes, I mean, out of 26 that I had prepared, I have one more question. Yes, so it's actually what the Russian teenager based in Canada says about the fact that it's not to people, it's not coming out to people, it's coming out to build a community. This video is particularly striking. One important point that I wanted to tackle with Denis is the question of archive, actually. So you edited, I believe 19 videos out of what you have defined as a set of 1,200 videos, and there is the gesture of editing, of course, and it's as any kind of film editing. It's about, building a narrative, building emotion, but it's also about keeping a trace of videos that could and will disappear. So maybe you could talk about this double gesture of editing, of making a film, and also of archiving.
Oui, tout à fait. C'était vraiment important pour moi de conserver ces archives, ces vidéos comme des archives, parce qu'en effet, elles risquent de disparaître. Et pour moi, le fait de marquer cette époque, voilà, les vidéos vont de 2012 à 2018, pour moi, c'est très important. On ne sait pas ce que l'avenir deviendra, on ne sait pas si les choses vont s'améliorer ou s'empirer par rapport à la situation des personnes LGBTQI+, dans le monde. Mais voilà, en tout cas, on saura que dans les années 2010, la situation était comme ça.
That's exactly it. It was extremely important to me to conserve these archives, to conserve these videos as archives, because indeed they could disappear. And it was important to me to mark this era. The videos are from 2012 to 2018, and we don't know what the future will hold. We don't know whether things will improve or get worse for LGBTQ plus people around the world. But what we do know through these videos is what the situation was in the 2010s.
Denis, tu veux ajouter do you want to add something or let's switch to the audience with the fact also that you're talking about the situation of LGBTQIA plus people in the world, but also there are some parts of the world that are missing in the film. You haven't found, so there are not many videos from France or Europe, but also there are lots of continents that are not represented in your film because it conveys the fact that they are not represented on YouTube. And of course, it's very telling.
Bien sûr, le fait qu'il y ait pas mal de régions géographiques dans le monde ne soient pas représentées dans le film dit quelque chose de fort, en nombre, en creux. En effet, ce n'est pas du tout un choix de ma part de n'avoir pas choisi des vidéos qui viennent de Russie, des pays d'Afrique ou de Moyen-Orient, ou même d'Asie, où il y en a très peu. C'est vraiment voilà, ce que j'ai trouvé sur Internet. Je voulais montrer par ces vidéos aussi ce que ces vidéos sont assez représentatives de ce que j'ai trouvé sur Internet. C'est important pour moi de garder la proportion de ces vidéos. Donc, en effet, il n'y a pas de vidéos. Et voilà, il y a encore dans le monde 11 pays qui criminalisent les relations homosexuelles par la peine de mort. Je crois qu'il y en a 63 qui pénalisent encore par les peines de prison. Donc voilà, ça explique en creux pourquoi ces vidéos ne sont pas présentes dans certaines parties du monde.
J'arrive.
So, if anyone has
I'll
a
just,
question,
should I translate? Should I translate?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead and translate. Sorry.
So, of course, there are
your microphone, so you can just. Go ahead.
So, of course, the fact that there are many regions, geographic regions missing in the film says something very powerful, subtly in the background. It's not at all my choice not to show videos from Russia, from Africa, from the Middle East. The fact that there are very few videos from Asia, that is accurate to what I found on the internet. I kept the actual proportions. And what that tells us, what is missing, is that there are still countries in the world where homosexuality is punishable by death. And I think it's 63 countries where one can be sent to prison for being homosexual. So that tells us something very powerful. The fact that these areas are missing, it's kind of the shadow part, the hidden part, but that is there in the film through the choices.
Very good. Okay, so we have a first question over here. Why don't you, you might want to take off your mask.
Sweet.
And try the microphone first. We'll make sure that they hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you
Awesome.
hear?
This is not intellectual at all, but what happens to the boy in Georgia who had the coming out from hell? Do we have the follow-up story?
Good question.
Vous parlez de Daniel, j'imagine, le jeune qui s'est fait virer de chez lui, c'est ça, hein?
Oui,
Oui, le garçon en Géorgie.
Oui, tout à fait. Bah, Daniel va bien. Cette vidéo date je crois que c'est 2016, donc beaucoup de choses sont passées depuis. Donc j'ai été bien sûr en contact avec tous les jeunes du film, bien sûr, pour leur demander leur autorisation. Et donc, lui va bien, les choses ont beaucoup changé, il s'est marié avec son mari, il est avocat, et il s'occupe de personnes LGBT qui se font virer de leur domicile familial également. Voilà. Et il n'est plus en contact avec sa famille, en tout cas aux dernières nouvelles. Mais il m'a dit en tout cas l'année dernière qu'il n'était pas. Il disait qu'il était en paix, en tout cas avec sa famille, mais en tout cas il ne se voyait plus. Mais qu'il y avait eu quand même 4-5 ans avant de pouvoir digérer cette histoire.
So Daniel is doing well. The video dates from 2016, and a lot has happened since then. Of course, I was in touch with all the young people whom you see in the film to ask their authorization. And so Daniel is doing really well. Things have changed a lot in his case. He's married to his husband, and he's a lawyer who represents LGBT people who've been thrown out of their homes by their families. He himself does not, at last I heard, was not in contact with his family. When I spoke to Daniel about this last year, he said that he was at peace with his family, but he did not see them. And he did tell me that it took him 4 or 5 years to digest the events that you see in the video.
Next question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Wait, say one more word so we.
Hello?
Can you hear? Okay, go ahead.
Donc, bonsoir, Monsieur Parrot. Merci beaucoup pour la projection et c'était vraiment incroyable. Et j'aime beaucoup votre film. Donc, my question would be like, first of all, I wish to thank you so much for presenting us of the very diverse scenarios of teenagers coming out, because the simple fact about coming out is that it's usually coming out to your family, while the different scenarios in different families are usually private information for each individual. So as you said, for you, the internet is something really revolutionary for the stories of coming out. For our generation, it's also the same, because it's usually something private that we don't share. So I think your film is really building up very good platform for us to know each other's story. So I have a question. Since you have shown so many diverse materials from the videos, I wish to know, do you have a certain criteria to select, or do you have a certain criteria to arrange them in a certain order? Thank you.
Did you hear
Merci beaucoup
everything, Denis?
pour votre question. Yes. Au niveau de l'organisation du montage, le point de départ, c'est que je ne voulais pas faire du tout un film misérabiliste. J'espère que j'y suis arrivé. Je voulais faire un film avec de l'espoir, parce que je trouve que la situation est peut être assez désespérante par moments. Et donc, vraiment, l'arc du montage, c'est ça pour moi. Commencer par une séquence avec Campbell et sa mère et son frère, voilà, où c'est assez drôle et c'est assez décalé. Moi, ça me fait beaucoup rire. Avoir un milieu de film un peu plus sombre avec Artem et Daniel, et puis finir quand même sur une note d'espoir avec Lorraine et sa grand-mère à la fin. Pour moi, c'est important de ne pas tomber dans le désespoir et de garder un début et une fin sans éloigner les problèmes, mais voilà, conserver comme une certaine douceur dans le film. Sorry, Nicolas.
Non, t'inquiète, tout va bien, mais je dois juste noter et j'arrive. So in terms of the organization of the edit, my starting point is that I didn't want to make a miserablest film, something that was complacent about darkness and despair. I wanted a film there that had hope, because of course things can be despairing and hopeless sometimes. I thought it was important to have some hope. So the arc of the edit started for me with Campbell and his mom, which is quite, in a way, a light and funny scene. And later, of course, in the film, we have much darker scenes with Artem and Daniel, for instance. And then we end again on a lighter note, a somewhat funny note, with Lauren and her grandmother. So it was really important for me not to ignore the problems, but to keep this touch of hope and to have a film that was in some way a little gentle.
Nora, did you want to add something? Or otherwise we
no,
have another question.
I was wondering if there were
Yeah,
other questions. Otherwise, maybe we can also, maybe Ronald may, you know, step in and add some comments because he hadn't much time
Actually,
to.
I wanted to add on to that question. If there was someone that you wanted to put in it, but you couldn't get the permission, if there were, out of that 1,200 videos that you've looked at, something that you really wanted to keep in it, but because of the permission, you couldn't.
Malheureusement, c'est arrivé. Oui, c'est aussi l'histoire d'un film. Il y a 3 vidéos que je n'ai pas vu mettre dans le film pour des questions d'autorisation. Il y avait une vidéo que j'aimais beaucoup d'une jeune Anglaise et je voulais garder ça, mais voilà, ce n'est pas dans le film, ça sera peut-être dans un autre, qui écrivait une lettre à ses parents. Pour moi, il y avait d'écrire une lettre, c'était important. Elle écrivait sa petite lettre, elle la mettait dans une enveloppe, elle courait, elle a glissé sous la porte de ses parents et elle se mettait à courir en hurlant. Et on entendait ses parents par la fenêtre qui hurlaient en disant « Mais non, mais tout va bien, t'inquiète pas ». La vidéo était très drôle, donc on l'a contactée. Elle était d'accord, ses parents non, vu qu'elle était mineure. Voilà, on n'a pas insisté. Il y a aussi une jeune femme trans.
Je peux traduire cette partie. Juste, j'arrive. So unfortunately, yes, that did happen, and you know that's the story of every film. But there were 3 videos that I really liked that are not in the film due to questions of authorization. There was one video in particular that I really liked a lot, which was with a young British woman, a British girl, and she was writing a letter. So maybe this is something I'll save for another film, but I really liked it for this one. It's an important format to write the letter. And so you see her writing a letter to her parents. You see her write it, put it in an envelope, walk to outdoors, and then she slips it under their door and she runs off screaming, and you hear her parents screaming, "No, it's okay, it's all right." And so it's really quite a funny video that I really wanted to use. And she was willing, but her parents were not. And because she's a minor, that had to go. Vas-y, Denis.
Et ensuite, il y avait 2 autres vidéos, donc une avec une jeune femme trans qui était au téléphone avec son père. Elle était d'accord, et son père, quand on lui a demandé si elle pouvait utiliser rien que sa voix, il a refusé catégoriquement. Donc, on n'a pas voulu aller plus loin. On s'est dit qu'il y a toujours possibilité de modifier la voix, etc. Mais on n'a pas voulu rentrer là-dedans. Quand on sentait qu'il y avait une difficulté, on ne voulait pas forcer.
J'arrive. So there were 2 other videos that we would have liked to use. One was of a young trans woman who was on the phone with her father, and she was okay with our using it, but her father was categorically opposed to it, just the use of his voice. And we decided not to go any further. I mean, there are things that you can do. We could have altered his voice, but when we felt that there was a problem there, an issue, we didn't want to force it. So we backed off.
Et rapidement, juste une troisième, c'est un jeune qu'on n'a pas réussi à contacter, qui était introuvable sur Internet. On l'a cherché pendant 2 ans et on n'a pas réussi à le contacter avec une productrice. Donc voilà, on a retiré du montage aussi.
And lastly, just quickly, there's one other we couldn't use, and it was a young man who we weren't able to contact. We searched for him for 2 years with my producers, and there just was no trace of him on the internet. So we had to remove the video from the film.
All right, we have another student who'd like to ask a question, if that's all right. Maybe you take off your mask so that we can hear you a little better.
Hello. Thank you so much for the film. I noticed in the film that there are several people who emphasize the fact that they want to be normal and that being gay is normal. But I want to say is like being gay is in a lot of ways, we're not normal at all. And after the 80s, the queer movement has come to a point that people are chasing the same-sex marriage and try to conform to a lot of the norms. I wonder, what would the role of a film creator be if people are, I don't know, trying to be normal and I don't know how to make sense, but because you're arranging a set of video clips, I wonder what will be the agency of the film creator to raise their own point of view about being normal, and also to, at the same time, respect the agency of the video creator, the original YouTuber. I'm not sure if I made sense.
J'espère avoir tout compris, mon anglais n'est pas très bon.
Tu veux que je te dise un peu ce que
Je
j'ai
veux bien,
suivi?
ouais. Pardon.
Donc, cette personne disait donc que plusieurs intervenants dans le film parlent de la normalité, ils veulent être normal, etc. Et que cela, depuis les années 80, avec l'arrivée du mouvement queer, maintenant, beaucoup de personnes LGBT, etc., cherchent le mariage, etc., donc des marqueurs de normalité. Mais cette personne qui pose la question dit, en tant que gay, nous ne sommes pas normales, beaucoup de fois. Et donc, la question pour toi était, quel serait le rôle du créateur d'un film si les gens essayent d'être normales? C'est-à-dire, quel est autant le pouvoir ou la liberté d'action du créateur de film dans sa façon d'agencer le film par rapport à cette question de la normalité, et aussi par rapport à la liberté d'expression, pas d'expression, l'agence, le pouvoir des intervenants. Voilà, j'espère que ce n'est pas trop fouillis.
Très bien, merci.
Et je crois que c'est la question aussi de la réception du film. Et Denis has made hundreds of Q&As and in various settings, and maybe he can talk about the reaction of people to his film also. Tu peux peut-être parler aussi de la réaction des gens. En fait, ça éclaire aussi l'impact du film.
Très bien. Alors, je ne sais pas exactement en anglais, mais en français, il y a souvent une confusion entre la normalité et la norme. C'est-à-dire être normal ou être dans la norme. Alors, je ne sais pas comment en anglais ça se traduit, mais souvent les gens, quand ils disent pas normal, en fait, ils ne sont pas dans la norme. En effet, les personnes LGBT sont en minorité, donc elles ne sont pas dans la norme sociale, mais elles sont normales. Alors, je ne sais pas comment en anglais ça se traduit, mais je sais qu'en français, il y a souvent cette confusion.
Je vais juste traduire ça, s'il te plaît, parce que c'est assez complexe. So I don't know exactly if this works in English, but in French, there's often a confusion between the idea of being normal and of being the norm, or being within the norm. Maybe this is me, the translator, stepping in. Maybe the question of normativity would work here as well with what Denis is saying. But Denis is saying that LGBTQI plus people are not in the norm because they are minority, but they are normal. Je te laisse continuer.
Et par rapport à la réception du film, donc c'est vrai que j'ai fait pas mal de projections. Ce qui m'a marqué, c'est vraiment à l'étranger. En France, je connais la situation française, et en Europe, un peu mieux. Donc, mais je peux vous donner trois projections qui ont marqué. J'ai fait des projections en Europe de l'Est, donc en Bulgarie, en Roumanie et en Pologne. Et c'est vrai qu'en Pologne, voilà, cette projection m'a marqué parce que j'avais une traductrice qui était adorable, mais que je sentais très stressée avant la projection. Donc, je lui ai demandé, mais il y a un problème, il y a quelque chose qui ne va pas. Et elle me dit, bah, je ne sais pas, j'ai un peu peur parce qu'il n'y a pas si longtemps, on a fait une projection du film 120 battements par minute de Robin Campillo. Et ça s'est très mal passé. Il y a des militants d'extrême droite qui sont venus dans la salle et qui ont tout cassé.
Je vais traduire. So maybe I can talk a little bit about the reception of the film. I've shown the film many, many times in many places, and what has really marked me was how things have gone abroad internationally, because I know the situation in France well, and in Western Europe as well, but there were 3 foreign screenings that really marked me. One was in Eastern Europe. We showed the film in Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland. And in Poland, I had a wonderful woman interpreter, but I could feel that she was very stressed out before the screening. And I asked her if something was wrong, and she said that she was a little scared because recently the Robin Campillo film 120 battements par minute, which has a different title in English that I personally, the interpreter, can't remember, but it's a film about ACT UP in the 80s in France, a fiction film, but based on fact. That film was shown at this place in Poland, and the screening went extremely badly because extreme right-wing activists turned up and broke everything in the room.
Il y a une autre, donc ça montre vraiment la situation et la réception d'un film peut être vraiment problématique selon le pays. Je suis allé présenter le film à Pékin, aussi en Chine, et là, c'est une réception très différente et très étonnante, ça m'a beaucoup surpris. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a eu, pareil, des questions-réponses après, et pour résumer, l'idée, c'était, mais en Chine, il n'y a aucun problème avec les LGBT. Aucun problème, on ne comprend même pas pourquoi à l'étranger, il y en a. Pour nous, ça n'est pas une question, c'est une non-question, et tout va bien chez nous. Ce qui n'est évidemment pas le cas. Mais en tout cas, voilà, là, il y a vraiment une façon de présenter les choses qui m'a beaucoup dérouté.
So that shows the situation, that the reception of the film can really be problematic depending on the country. Another place that really surprised me was Beijing. I went to China to show the film, and that was a very different situation. And again, one that truly surprised me. As we often do, we had a Q&A after the screenings. And what I realized in China is people were saying to me, we don't have any problem with LGBTQ people here. And in fact, we don't even understand why this is a problem internationally in other countries. For us, this is a non-question. This is not a problem. There's nothing wrong here. And that's obviously not the case, but that attitude really took me aback.
Et la troisième, juste pour terminer, c'était en France, c'est juste une question d'un vieux monsieur qui me revient souvent. Après la projection, il est venu me voir et il m'a dit « Bon, moi, je suis normal, mais votre film est très bien. »
So the third was after a screening in France. There's a question that an old man asked me that often comes back to me. So he came to me after the screening and he said, well, I'm normal, but your film is very good.
All right, we have another question. I'm just going to take an opportunity of the fact that I'm sitting here to also ask a question about the editing of the film. And that is to ask you how much editing you did in terms of adding material, of deciding to leave certain material out, of adding sound. So for example, the portrait of Cole, that's followed by a series of photographs of him from a young age in different sports uniforms. Was that something that you solicited from Cole afterwards and added? The scene in the hot air balloon where there's this wonderful kind of sound musical accompaniment with that image, was that originally, did that appear with the video originally, or did you add that? Anyway, those are two examples that come to mind of either visual elements or sound elements that I wondered if you added as the director.
Non, donc ces musiques, c'est moi qui les ai ajoutées, ouais. Je voulais dire une chose aussi, c'est qu'un film ne se fait jamais seul. J'ai fait beaucoup de montage tout seul sur le film. Il y a aussi mes productrices qui ont été vraiment d'une aide précieuse. Claire Babani et Éléonore Boissineau, que je remercie ici. Il y a aussi une amie qui est venue me donner un regard complice qui s'appelle Félicia Reckling. Voilà. Donc, juste pour dire qu'un montage ne se fait jamais seul et que les regards extérieurs sont très importants. Concernant la vidéo de Cole, c'était... Alors, parfois, les personnes trans n'aiment pas qu'on montre des photos d'elles avant leur transition. Mais là, c'est vraiment une volonté de Cole qui voulait expliquer de façon très simple d'où il venait et où il allait. Donc, c'est vraiment lui qui m'a incité à montrer ces photos, qui étaient extrêmement fortes. Et donc, après, la musique rajoutait, mais voilà, en tout cas, je tenais à dire que ces photos, vraiment, c'était une volonté de Cole de les montrer, quoi. Et pour la montgolfière, je trouvais que c'était une musique très joyeuse, très spectacle, qui correspond bien à Dany, quoi, comme une sorte d'ouverture de rideau devant la star.
So I added the music myself, but I wanted to add before that that a film is never made alone. I did spend a lot of time alone editing this film, but I also greatly benefited from the advice and eye of my producers, Claire Babani and Eleonore Boissineau, and also a friend who came and looked and really gave me important advice, Felicia Reichling. So it's important to say that films are not made alone. Now, regarding the photos of Cole, sometimes trans people don't like to have images of themselves shown before their transition, images from before their transition. But in this case, it was Cole himself who wanted these images to be seen to show where he had come from. And so that was Cole's desire. And I think it's important to say that we put the photos there because he wanted that. As for the music in the hot air balloon, it feels very joyous, very happy, very appropriate to Danny. It's like a big show is happening and the curtain is about to open to reveal the star, Danny.
If I may for a second, also.
Nora, do you want to add something? Sure, go ahead.
There was the question of agency, and I believe that also Denis is showing the protagonists as directors of their own lives and as they stage, actually. And maybe again, I mean, I guess it was a criteria in the selection of the videos because it's about staging. And all the videos have a specific proposal in terms of yeah, again, staging, mise en scène. And maybe Ronald also had something to add about this question of choosing a dialogue over the phone, choosing a monologue, choosing a moving camera, because also there's an emergency, etc. The film is showing people who have this agency of showing themselves and staging a scene.
Actually, I think that's a great point. I was thinking, first off, you show a range of responses, a kind of range of affects, a sense of being embraced by family, kind of joyous, but also very painful moments. And I think that's important that you show that range because that range still exists. But I would also point out what I heard at times. You had adolescents or young adults searching for the strategy to convince their parents that it was okay. You know, I was born this way is one strategy. You know, to say to the parents, it's not your fault. You know, I was born this way. There was the one young girl who said, I told my parents I'm bisexual, making it easier for them, even though she didn't believe it. So there's a sense that in the coming out, there is a way of scripting your coming out and thinking about your particular situation, the religious family or a more embracing family, that it can be funny, you know, with Danny, whose mother already knows he's gay, you know, and she just kind of laughs him off, you know, and he gets hysterical, you know, campy, you know, and I love the moment where his black fingernails sweep across the screen and we see that this is like a pretty comfortable gay kid versus other ones who are, you know, experience something that was very painful and trying to find ways of not separating themselves from the family. And so there is within that, as I say, the script, the dialogue with their parents, with or reflecting back as the one Russian guy did, trying to find a way of not completely cutting themselves off from family and the hope that maybe it can be reconnected. And again, I think that's part of the strategy of saying, you know, I was born this way, it's not your fault, or other strategies within that. And I love how you capture that because buried within that is the incredible pain that some of them have experienced in coming to that moment, but the incredible braveness in confessing this, in taking this to their family, how brave that is. So I think that this also connects with what Nora is saying. The agency comes in that braveness of actually confessing. You
Si je
know,
peux ajouter
I'm gonna
juste,
say
juste
one more
quelque
thing.
chose.
Another thing.
Don't forget what you're going to say.
Oh,
Let him answer. Yeah.
Yes, go for it. I was just going to say real quick, I love how even though you have added a few things, you start the film, when I was young, the internet did not exist and I did not have this, and you disappear at that point, and this film is just the voices, that there isn't you inserting yourself as a voice of God, that you allow the adolescents and the young people to carry the film from beginning to end along with their parents. And that's very rare because often a filmmaker wants to insert him, her, themselves, and give a particular perspective on all of this. And you leave that range for us to kind of grapple with when the film closes. So I think that's a really smart strategy on your part.
Eh ben, je peux rajouter justement quelque chose, c'est que cette phrase du début que vous aimez beaucoup, c'est Nora, qui est ici présente, qui m'a fait le conseil. Et merci pour ça aussi, Nora. Voilà, il y a plein de gens qui ont participé à ce film. Et donc, je voulais te remercier pour ça. C'est Nora qui m'a dit, mais il manque une phrase au début, il faut que tu te positionnes par rapport à ça.
So in fact, what I wanted to add is that sentence at the beginning, which you appreciated, Ron, it's Nora, who's with us here, who advised me to do that. And so I wanted to thank you for that, Nora. Thank you, really. It was you who said, you know, there's something missing at the beginning, a sentence, you have to position yourself.
Et par rapport à la stratégie de ces jeunes, je trouve aussi qu'ils sont assez malins, mine de rien. Parce que pour moi, ils se servaient un peu de cette caméra aussi en disant aux parents, à leurs parents, on va se filmer, je vous filme et je vais vous dire un truc. Pour moi, ils se protégeaient aussi d'une certaine façon et c'est assez malin. Parce que les parents peut-être se disent comment je vais réagir parce que la caméra tourne. Ils se servaient de la caméra comme un bouclier et j'ai trouvé ça assez drôle et assez fort.
J'arrive. So regarding the strategy of these young people, they're actually very clever. They're pretty smart, I think, because they tell their parents, I'm going to film you and I'm going to tell you something. And by doing that, they're protecting themselves because their parents might think, oh, I'm being filmed. I better be careful how I react. So in a sense, they're using the camera as a shield. And I think there's something really strong and really powerful about that.
Okay, we're going to have one last question from a student, and then we don't want to keep you awake too long in the middle of the night. So maybe after this last question, we'll give Denis and Nora and Ron the opportunity to make one last closing remark if there's something you're dying to say, and then we'll let you go back to sleep. So, Dylan.
Thank you so much for this wonderful film and for being here with us. I wanted to ask about the videos that were not in English, and particularly the videos in which the subjects were speaking their native language but used terms in English, such as Ulysse, who says, you know, je fais mon coming out, or Artem, who's speaking Russian but says the word gay. And I was wondering about your choice to include these videos that were not only from different countries, but in different languages, and what your thoughts were, especially as a French filmmaker working primarily with material that is not in French, on the issue of translation, either of these terms or of the coming out video as a genre.
Je ne suis pas sûr d'avoir bien compris la question.
La question, c'est... Il y a plusieurs langues dans le film et dans certaines de ces langues qui ne sont pas l'anglais, on entend des mots anglais comme coming out dans la vidéo d'Ulysse, gay dans la vidéo de Artem. Et donc, cet étudiant te demande comment tu t'es posé la question de la traduction et aussi, pas de la traduction des sous-titres, mais la traduction de ces termes en utilisant différentes langues, vidéos de différentes langues, et aussi le film de coming out en tant que genre.
C'est vrai que les termes anglais sont très courants, en tout cas en France. C'est-à-dire il y a pas de mot qui remplace coming out. Coming out, ça vient de coming out of the closet. Et on disait il y a quelques années sortir du placard, mais c'est un terme vraiment désuet qu'on n'utilise plus beaucoup aujourd'hui. Donc on dit coming out. Et c'est vrai qu'on dit aussi, on dit plus gay que homo. C'est vrai que la langue anglo-saxonne a beaucoup est très présente, quoi.
It's true that English terms are extremely common in dealing with these subjects, at least in France. For instance, in France, there's no other word for coming out. Coming out comes from coming out of the closet. And in a certain time ago, some years ago in France, we used to say sortir du placard, which is an exact literal translation of coming out of the closet, but that would be tremendously old-fashioned to use nowadays. And similarly, we use more and more gay rather than homosexuel or another French word. So it's true that words from the Anglo-Saxon context are extremely present in discussing these issues.
Et par rapport au film de genre, ce film, c'est vrai que c'est un film de coming out, et il y en a beaucoup en fiction. Il y a des films très beaux comme Beautiful Think et plus récemment Love, Simon, que je trouve très réussi. Et en documentaire, c'est qu'il y en a très peu. Il y en a un que j'aime beaucoup qui s'appelle Omelette, qui est réalisé par un Français, Rémi Lange, que je vous conseille, qui est disponible sur Internet. Et il a filmé en Super 8, une sorte de journal intime où il dévoilait à sa famille, et en filmant sa famille, son coming out. C'était dans les années 90, 93, je crois. Mais le film est sorti en 98. Voilà, donc au niveau documentaire, c'est le seul exemple que moi j'ai. Donc j'apporte ma petite pierre dans cet édifice.
And in terms of the coming out film as a genre, it's true that there are a lot of coming out films in fiction. There's some coming out films that I like a great deal in narrative cinema, like Beautiful Things, or more recently, Love, Simon. But in documentary, there's not so much. There's one documentary that I actually really recommend. It's called Omelette. It's a French film directed by Rémi Lange, and I really recommend it. Rémi Lange filmed his family and his coming out process in Super 8 in the 1990s, and it was released in 1998. And to my knowledge, it's the only documentary about coming out. It's the only one I know. And so in my own modest way, I'm contributing to this edifice with my own film.
All right, so I wanted to give each of the three of you an opportunity to say briefly if there's some additional point that you wanted to make about Denis' film before we conclude for the evening. So maybe Ron.
Yeah, I'm still contemplating the last question, which I think is a really important question. But it also made me think about a kind of queer cinema festival circuit, a kind of underground of passing on of cinema, of also the internet and streaming, how the language maybe is collapsing. And I think that we have to be careful about imposing our notions of subjectivity, identity, how we sort of organize our own lives and think that everybody should have a coming out experience, that this should be a trope that everybody experiences. And yet having students in a kind of global university who have seen Brokeback Mountain, Call Me By Your Name, Boys Don't Cry. I mean, I could go on and on with the list, Carol, Moonlight, that on some level they bring these kind of tropes into those other countries. They're embracing them. On some level, they want these films because within often their own national context, they don't have these kind of films. But it does give them ways of thinking about their own life that is coming from the outside, that is not coming from maybe within, and probably something is lost and gained at the same time. So again, I think it's a really important question to contemplate. But I totally agree with you. And the one film, the last thing I'll say, I was thinking that the parallel Hollywood film to this is Love, Simon. I mean, you know, it is a coming out film and it is on social media. I mean, again, the sense of texting, the sense of Instagram, Facebook, I mean, you know, communication. It's a film that kind of captures this moment, similar to your film.
Thank you, Ron. Nora, your turn.
No, I'm really happy that this screening happened. I really hope that the film will travel and will be screened in again at Columbia and in other universities. I believe this film can, you know, generate important conversations. And Denis has really traveled all over the world in also many, you know, either social or political or activist settings to present the film, also at schools in France. And so I really hope the film will continue to travel, and especially in the United States. And I thank you, of course, Denis. Merci infiniment pour ta participation.
Thank you, Nora. And Denis, would you like to say a word in concluding?
Oui, bien sûr. Pour rebondir sur le film Love, Simon, c'est pas les qualités cinématographiques du film que j'aime beaucoup, c'est le fait que le film se termine bien. Et c'est une histoire d'amour gay qui se termine bien. Et ça, c'est assez nouveau à Hollywood, parce qu'il y a eu déjà des films, mais c'était Philadelphia, Brokeback Mountain, forcément avec des décès et des morts à la fin, où ça devait être tragique. Le fait d'être gay, ça devait être tragique. Et Love, Simon, c'est un des premiers films hollywoodiens où les choses se terminent bien.
So just to react about this discussion regarding Love, Simon, I don't like the film because of its cinematic qualities. I like it because it has a happy ending. It's a gay love story that has a happy ending. I mean, we've had Hollywood gay films before, Philadelphia, Brokeback Mountain, but these are films that end with death. These are tragic films, and it's quite rare and really nice to have Love, Simon be a gay love story that has a happy ending.
Et je voudrais juste donner rapidement un message d'espoir aussi pour la suite. J'aimerais que dans 10 ans, toutes ces vidéos de coming out soient ringardes, vraiment, qu'on voit ça comme quelque chose de ringard, parce que c'est vrai que c'est étrange de devoir annoncer ça à ses proches, à sa famille, et pourquoi juste présenter son copain ou sa copine à ses parents ou à sa famille. Voilà, j'espère que ces vidéos disparaîtront, enfin, ça serait un bon signe que les choses avancent bien, quoi. Et je voudrais, pour finir, remercier bien sûr Nora, la Maison Française, l'Université Columbia, Nicolas, Ronald. Voilà, et merci à tous. Fanny et toutes les personnes que j'ai oubliées aussi, pardon.
So I just want to close with a message of hope. I hope that the next step will be that in 10 years, all these coming out videos are tremendously old-fashioned, old school, yesterday's news. Because if you think about it, it's really strange that you have to tell your family this. Why can't you just introduce your family to your boyfriend or your girlfriend? So I think actually it would be a very healthy thing if these videos were to disappear in the near future. And in closing, I want to thank everyone, Nora, Maison Française, Nicholas, all of you in the audience, Fanny, and all the people that I've forgotten for being here.
And Ronald.
So
I'm sorry.
And me too. I'm thanking Ronald and the audience for your wonderful questions.
Yes, so I repeat these thanks. Thank you so much for this beautiful film, Denis. Thank you, Nora, for curating this festival and for introducing this film to us. Thanks, Ron, for joining us. Nicola, for the wonderful translation. All of you for coming and staying. Thank you very much.
Merci à vous.
Bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.